4 years after Japan seized the Philippines, darkness still hung over the islands. The war only began to turn when the Allied forces, led by the United States, achieved a decisive victory at Leyte in late 1944. It was a triumph that rekindled hope for freedom, yet it was still not enough to liberate the entire nation. For General Douglas MacArthur, the American commander who had been forced to leave the islands in the darkest days of the war and vowed to return, the campaign for Luzon was more than just a military operation. It was a promise of honor that had to be fulfilled. Luzon, the largest island of the Philippines, home to the capital Manila, with its deep water ports and vital airfields, was the key that would unlock the road straight to Japan. But on the other side, Field Marshal Tomoyuki Yamashita, the so-called Tiger of Malaya, was also preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the United States. After his crushing defeat at Leyte, Yamashita knew Japan could no longer match America's overwhelming power in open battle. Instead, he turned to a strategy of prolonged defense, withdrawing his forces to the northern and eastern regions of Luzon and building strongholds deep within the rugged Cordillera and Sierra Madre mountains, where the terrain itself could serve as his fortress. His goal was simple: to bog down American forces, forcing them to pay in blood for every inch of ground on the long road toward Tokyo. But MacArthur had planned every move. Before launching the main invasion of Luzon, he needed a forward base from which American aircraft could dominate the skies and protect the fleet. In December 1944, under Brigadier General William Dunkel, the U.S. Western Task Force carried out a lightning assault on the sparsely populated island of Mindoro. Within days, troops of the 19th Infantry Regiment and the 503rd Parachute Regiment had secured the beaches and constructed 2 airstrips, allowing the 5th Air Force to control the air over Luzon and prepare for the great invasion to come. Throughout that month, American reconnaissance planes and Navy minesweepers scoured Lingayen Gulf, while submarines, commandos, and fake paratroopers operations launched a series of deceptive attacks in the south to mislead the enemy. Yet Yamashita was not easily fooled. With his experience and stubborn resolve, he kept his focus where it mattered most, reinforcing the defenses and artillery at Lingayen Gulf, the very place where deep down he knew the United States would return, bringing with it the promise of freedom and the unstoppable strength of America. At dawn on January 9, 1945, the skies over Luzon thundered as American naval guns unleashed a storm of fire. More than 70 warships and cruisers advanced into Lingayen Gulf, pounding Japanese positions from 7 a.m. At exactly 8 o'clock, landing craft carrying the first assault waves surged toward the beaches. This was the largest amphibious operation ever launched by the United States in the Pacific. Over 175,000 troops of the U.S. 6th Army under Lieutenant General Walter Kruger, including the 1st and 14th Corps, supported by aircraft carriers, destroyers, artillery, and air cover, stormed across more than 20 miles of shoreline. Unlike the narrow, deadly beaches of Normandy, Lingayen offered broad, calm waters, but the Japanese had turned the hills and villages beyond into fortresses. Before the landing craft could even reach shore, waves of kamikaze pilots descended from the sky. Between January 3rd and 13th, hundreds of Japanese suicide planes struck the American fleet, sinking or damaging 47 vessels, including the escort carrier USS Amane Bay. Yet despite the chaos, the Americans held firm. Dense anti-aircraft fire and unshakable determination kept the fleet intact, ensuring the landings could continue. Once the beachhead was secured, the 6th Army split into 2 drives. The I Corps, under Lieutenant General Innes P. Swift, moved north to cut off Japanese retreat routes into the Cordillera Mountains, while the 14th Corps, led by Lieutenant General Oscar W. Griswold, advanced south through the Central Plains toward Manila. In the opening days, resistance was surprisingly light. The 37th and 40th Divisions pushed through the rice fields of Tarlac, Moncada, and Cameling, greeted by villagers cheering through tears as American soldiers marched past. The liberators had returned. But soon, the first major challenge emerged at Clark Field, the strategic air base nestled among the western hills. U.S. intelligence had estimated only 4,000 to 8,000 defenders, but the reality was far grimmer. Nearly 30,000 Japanese troops from the Shimbu group, including 8,500 elite soldiers armed with artillery, machine guns, and fortified bunkers. The rough terrain made progress slow. Enemy guns hidden in caves swept the runways with deadly fire. Step by step, American forces advanced, calling in heavy artillery and M7 howitzer tanks for support. Only by the end of January did they finally secure the entire area. Farther north, the I Corps faced a formidable armored opponent, the Japanese 2nd Tank Division, or Geki Force. They had transformed the town of San Manuel into a stronghold, concealing 45 Type 97 and Type 95. On January 19th, an American reconnaissance unit was met with fierce fire. General Kruger ordered a 5-day artillery barrage before sending in the infantry. On January 24th, the 161st Regiment of the 25th Division entered the town, losing 6 Sherman tanks in the opening assault. But with mortar and M7 howitzer support, they gradually pushed through the streets. Fighting raged house to house, street to street. American troops advanced under the cover of smoke grenades, silencing enemy guns one by one. By January 28th, as 13 Japanese tanks tried to break out, American bazookas and 37mm anti-tank guns destroyed 10 of them. Over 775 Japanese soldiers were killed, with only about 400 escaping. The Americans lost 60 men and 200 wounded. But the victory at San Manuel opened the road toward the Baguio Highlands and secured a firm foothold for the liberation of Luzon. In January 1945, one of the most remarkable American operations in the Philippines was the Cabanatuan prison camp raid. After the Palawan massacre in December 1944, General Douglas MacArthur feared that over 500 American and Filipino prisoners held at Cabanatuan would be executed before Allied forces could reach them. Major Russell Volkmann, working alongside Filipino guerrillas, proposed a daring plan, a combined operation between U.S. Rangers and local resistance fighters to strike deep behind enemy lines. On the evening of January 30th, 90 Rangers from the 6th Ranger Battalion, 80 guerrillas from the Huck Resistance, and 2 Alamo scout teams crossed a river and crept through the jungle toward the camp. They placed sniper teams to cut off enemy reinforcements and used a red flare as the signal to attack. Overhead, a P-61 Black Widow dropped napalm near the area to draw Japanese attention away. As darkness fell, the raiders stormed the camp, killing the guards, destroying the searchlights, and freeing 512 prisoners, both soldiers and civilians. Emaciated and sick, many were carried to safety on ox-drawn carts under the moonlight, escorted by local guerrillas. The entire operation succeeded with minimal casualties, a flawless rescue that proved the effectiveness of American Special Forces working hand in hand with Filipino fighters. To support the main advance and cut Yamashita's supply lines, the U.S. 11th Corps launched a second amphibious landing on January 15th along Luzon's western coast. The 38th Infantry Division and 34th Regiment came ashore in Zambales Province almost unopposed. Local guerrillas had already captured San Marcelino Airfield and helped the Americans secure the port of Olongapo by January 30th. From there, the troops pushed east along Route 7, cutting through dense jungle toward the Zigzag Pass, Horseshoe Bend. Between early February and February 14th, the 152nd Regiment fought around the clock to break through a maze of tunnels and fortified high ground. By February 21st, the Bataan Peninsula, the site of America's painful surrender in 1942, was fully liberated. The U.S. flag once again flew over the same ground where so many Americans had suffered, marking both redemption and the reopening of the western approach to Manila Bay. Meanwhile, in southern Luzon, the 11th Airborne Division of the 14th Corps under Major General Joseph Swing prepared to strike Manila from the south. On January 31st, the vanguard, the 188th Glider Infantry Regiment, landed at Nasugbu Beach, supported by a 20 Havoc and P-38 Lightning aircraft. They quickly secured the town and bridges, paving the way for the 187th Glider Infantry Regiment to come ashore. On February 3rd, C-47 transports dropped 511 paratroopers from the 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment over the Tagaytay Ridge. Though some were scattered by strong winds, they regrouped within hours and seized key positions on the high ground. From there, the 11th Airborne launched a rapid assault northward, breaking through the Genco Line, a defensive network of trenches and bunkers guarding Manila's southern approaches. Within days, they captured Nichols Field on February 12th and Fort McKinley on February 13th, cutting off the Japanese escape route to the south. In northern Luzon, the U.S. 14th Corps, under Lieutenant General Walter Kruger, together with the 1st Cavalry Division and the 37th Infantry Division, launched a full-scale offensive toward Manila. General Douglas MacArthur urged his commanders to move quickly. He wanted the capital liberated before his wife's birthday. On January 26, 1945, Kruger ordered the 37th Division to cross the Pampanga River and advance along Highway 3 toward San Fernando and Calumpit. By January 30th, reconnaissance units had built pontoon bridges and seized key crossings. Under MacArthur's personal pressure, Kruger pushed the 1st Cavalry Division forward for a rapid assault. On the night of February 2nd to 3rd, mechanized cavalry units broke through Japanese lines, driving swiftly down Route 7 and bursting into the outskirts of Manila. The vanguard of the 8th Cavalry Regiment crossed Quiapo Bridge, reached the University of Santo Tomas, and freed more than 4,000 foreign prisoners by 8 p.m. The next morning, thousands of Manila residents flooded the streets, cheering through tears as American armored vehicles rolled past, a moment of pure liberation after 3 years of darkness. But freeing Manila would come at a terrible price. Defending the city was Rear Admiral Sanji Iwabuchi, commander of the Yokosuka 31st Naval Force, with roughly 12,000 Japanese Marines. Despite Yamashita's order to withdraw, Iwabuchi and his officers vowed to fight to the death to preserve their honor. From February 3rd onward, brutal street fighting erupted. From the north, the 1st Cavalry and 37th Divisions tried to cross the Pasig River, but the Japanese had destroyed the bridges, forcing American troops to slog through swamps and build pontoon crossings under heavy fire. The Japanese had turned every building, every school, and even hospitals into bunkers, rigged with mines, booby traps, and explosives. They massacred civilians in one of the most horrific atrocities of the Pacific War, the Manila Massacre. It wasn't until March 3rd, after American 155mm artillery and naval guns from Manila Bay leveled the Intramuros district, that the last pockets of resistance were wiped out. The month-long battle left the capital in ruins, and between 100,000 and 120,000 civilians were killed, a staggering human tragedy amid victory. While the fight for Manila raged, U.S. forces carried out another operation, the recapture of Corregidor, a mission heavy with symbolism and pride. The small island guarding the entrance to Manila Bay, known as the Rock, had been the site of America's bitter surrender in 1942. This time, MacArthur vowed it would be reclaimed. The assault would be a dual invasion, by air and by sea. From late January to mid-February, American bombers and artillery poured thousands of tons of explosives onto the island, reducing its defenses to rubble. On February 16th, hundreds of paratroopers from the 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment jumped onto Topside Hill in fierce winds. Many were blown off the cliffs but held their ground and opened fire. At the same time, 24th Infantry Division troops landed by sea at San Jose Beach. Japanese defenders launched desperate counterattacks. The fiercest came on February 18th at Banzai Point, when more than 500 Japanese Marines charged uphill screaming their battle cries and were annihilated by American fire. On February 26th, U.S. soldiers raised the stars and stripes atop Malinta Hill, marking the full recapture of Corregidor, the same island where, 3 years earlier, the flag had been lowered in defeat. Meanwhile, in southern Luzon, another daring operation unfolded, the Los Banos Raid, one of the most brilliant rescues of the entire war. From early February, Major General Joseph Swing had been ordered to plan the mission to free more than 2,000 civilian prisoners held in an internment camp near Los Banos. The operation was delayed while the 11th Airborne Division fought at Nichols Field and Fort McKinley, but by February 20th, the plan was complete. A 4-phase, perfectly coordinated assault. According to the plan, a reconnaissance team and local guerrillas would secretly swim across Laguna de Bay at night, eliminate the guards, and signal the main attack. Then Company B of the 1st Battalion, 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment, would parachute into a small drop zone beside the camp and storm the gates. Simultaneously, the rest of the battalion would cross the lake aboard 54 LVT-4 amphibious vehicles to evacuate the prisoners, while the 188th Glider Infantry Regiment and tanks advanced along the highway to block any Japanese counterattack. At 7 a.m. on February 23rd, green parachutes blossomed over Los Banos as gunfire erupted. The recon teams, already in position, silently cut communication lines and killed the guards. Company B stormed the compound, catching the Japanese soldiers in their sleep, while the LVTS roared ashore, blasting bunkers with 75mm guns. In just 1 hour, 2,147 prisoners, men, women, children, and the elderly, were freed and ferried safely across the lake with minimal losses. The Los Banos Raid became one of the most daring and flawlessly executed operations of World War II, showcasing the unmatched coordination and courage of U.S. airborne, naval, and special forces, together with the bravery of Filipino guerrillas. Outside Manila, to the northeast, the city's water supply became a matter of survival. The capital depended entirely on 2 main reservoirs, Novaliches and Ipo. Novaliches, located on the outskirts, had been captured by U.S. forces on February 5th, but it drew its water from Ipo Dam, situated about 15 kilometers deeper in the Sierra Madre Mountains. Upstream lay Wawa Dam, though it had been disconnected from Manila's water system since 1938. The mountainous terrain surrounding both dams was held by the Japanese Shimbu group, roughly 35,000 troops under Major General Shizuo Yokoyama. His forces were divided into 3 commands: the Kawashima Force guarding Ipo Dam in the north, the Kobayashi Force defending the central sector around Montalban and Wawa, and the Noguchi Force entrenched in the south near Antipolo and the shores of Laguna de Bay. Together, they formed a vast defensive complex known as the Shimbu Fortress, stretching over 30 miles from Ipo to Wawa, connected by a web of tunnels, caves, and artillery positions. The Japanese had heavily armed the area: mortars, machine guns, 105mm and 155mm field guns, and even 200mm and 447mm rockets. Many caves had up to 10 entrances, fortified with sandbags and expertly camouflaged. Deep inside, Japanese gunners could fire from hidden openings and retreat before counterfire, making them extremely difficult targets for U.S. artillery. In early February, the U.S. 6th Army assigned the task of clearing the Shimbu region to the 14th Corps. But Kruger's forces had already been depleted for other operations, leaving him with only the 6th Infantry Division and the 2nd Cavalry Brigade to assault Wawa and Antipolo before turning toward Ipo Dam. On February 20th, the 2nd Cavalry Brigade crossed the Marikina River, seizing the towns of Taytay and Taguig almost without resistance. 2 days later, the 6th Division captured Montalban and crossed a 3-kilometer-wide valley with ease. But once they entered the hills of Oro, Pacawagan, Mataba, and Yabang, Japanese fire erupted from every direction. Enemy troops hid in caves, firing bursts before vanishing again, forcing the Americans to counter with napalm and white phosphorus shells to burn away camouflage and flush them out. At Antipolo, the 2nd Cavalry Brigade joined forces with the marking guerrillas and Hunter ROTC units, bombarding Japanese defenses for 2 days before launching their assault on March 8th. Hill after hill fell to American hands, but the cost was steep. 295 Americans killed, while the Noguchi force lost over 3,300 men. On March 14th, Major General Edwin Patrick, commander of the 6th Division, was killed by a sniper while inspecting the front lines. Still, the offensive succeeded in driving a wedge between the Noguchi and Kobayashi forces, forcing Yokoyama to withdraw his troops from the southern sector. By March, fighting along the Shimbu line reached a new level of brutality. General Griswold decided to attack Wawa first, then move on to Ipo. The 6th Infantry Division and 1st Cavalry Brigade took turns assaulting fortified positions, while American artillery fired phosphorus and napalm shells to create smoke cover for advancing troops. Flamethrowers and bazookas silenced cave after cave. On March 11th, cavalry troops captured the Antipolo Heights, though the 6th Division's left flank remained pinned down by Japanese mortars and machine guns. The following weeks were a nightmare. The men fought through blood-soaked trenches, slept in mosquito-infested caves, and endured tropical downpours even during the dry season. According to Triumph in the Philippines, each U.S. regiment lost 55 to 60 men per day, a staggering rate of attrition. Yet they pressed on relentlessly. On March 24th, the 43rd Division seized Mount Yabang. 3 days later, on March 27th, the 6th Division captured Mount Baytangan and pushed deeper into the jungle. Once Antipolo was secured, General Kruger turned his focus to the ultimate objective, Ipo Dam. He knew that only when the waters of the Angat River flowed again into Manila could the city truly come back to life. However, General MacArthur, still believing Wawa Dam was the main source, sent an urgent message asking, "When will you take Wawa?" Kruger had to clarify that Wawa had been out of service since 1938 and that Ipo supplied 1/3 of Manila's water. By mid-April, the 43rd Division moved north to prepare for the assault on Ipo, while the 38th Division took over the southern front. Despite the reinforcements, Kruger's forces remained stretched thin. He had lost the 6th Division to operations in Zambales and had to divert men elsewhere. To fill the gap, he enlisted the help of the marking guerrillas. About 3,000 local fighters led by former bus driver Marcus Marking, Augustine, and his courageous wife, Ye Panlilio. These guerrillas, familiar with every mountain trail and river crossing, guided American troops through the dense jungle and carried out diversionary attacks. Their knowledge and bravery proved invaluable as the U.S. Army prepared for the decisive battle to capture Ipo Dam, the lifeline that would restore Manila to the living. The plan to capture Ipo Dam was drawn up with precision and care. According to the operation outline, the 103rd Infantry Regiment would lead the main assault, advancing along the Katatinga Ridge about 4 miles from the dam, then following the ridge line downward toward the target. On the left flank, the 172nd Regiment would swing around Osboy Ridge to cut off Japanese supply routes, while the 169th Regiment carried out a diversionary attack along Metropolitan Road to draw enemy fire. Meanwhile, the Marking Regiment, made up of Filipino guerrillas, was divided into 2 detachments. The northern force would climb Mount Cabuyao, and the southern force would move along the Angat River Valley, guiding and supporting the Americans. Before the ground assault, the U.S. 5th Air Force launched one of the largest napalm bombardments of the entire Southwest Pacific campaign, dropping 250,000 gallons of the incendiary fuel, the heaviest use of napalm in the theater up to that time. For 3 days in early May, hundreds of B-25, P-38, and P-51 aircraft bombed relentlessly, burning out caves, ridges, and artillery positions. The devastation was so intense that Japanese anti-aircraft crews were forced to withdraw temporarily, allowing U.S. reconnaissance planes to survey the area freely. The bombing even fooled General Kawashima, who believed the main attack would hit Wawa, and he ordered his troops south, exposing his northern flank completely. On the night of May 6th to 7th, 1945, the assault on Ipo Dam began. Under cover of darkness, American infantry silently moved into position to maintain secrecy. White phosphorus shells from the artillery lit up the night sky as troops climbed steep jungle trails, cutting through vines and scrambling over rock ledges. By dawn, the 103rd Regiment had advanced to within 5 kilometers of the dam, while the 172nd Regiment fought through rough terrain toward Bigti and Osboy Ridge. In the north, the marking guerrillas marched 7 miles without resistance. The Japanese never expected a night attack. The following morning, the 169th Regiment launched a feint along Metropolitan Road, drawing heavy Japanese artillery and machine gun fire and allowing the other 2 regiments to flank from both sides. From May 7th to 11th, American forces advanced steadily through torrential rain and deadly crossfire, gaining only a few hundred meters each day. Then, on May 16th and 17th, waves of P-47s and P-38s returned, unleashing massive napalm strikes and fragmentation bombs that turned the Japanese positions into a blazing inferno. Infantrymen scaled the bomb-scarred cliffs using bamboo ladders, seizing one high point after another. On the night of May 13th, as the Japanese lines crumbled, the marking guerrillas waded across the Angat River under cover of darkness. By 1:30 p.m. on May 17th, they raised the American flag over the hydroelectric plant south of the dam. Ipo Dam was now in U.S. hands. Strangely, despite wiring the facility with hundreds of kilograms of explosives, the Japanese never detonated them, perhaps due to confusion, exhaustion, or the sheer pressure of the bombing. 3 days later, Metropolitan Road was cleared, engineers swept the last tunnels for hidden mines, and Wawa Dam was also secured. By May 1945, water from the Angat River once again flowed into Manila, saving millions of civilians suffering from drought and devastation. While 14th Corps battled the Shimbu line, 1st Corps continued its relentless pursuit of General Yamashita's Shimbu group in northern Luzon. The 33rd, 37th, 43rd, and 25th Divisions pushed through the treacherous mountain passes of Balete, Salaksak, and Dalton. Across the Cordillera Range, Yamashita had transformed the highlands into natural fortresses, peaks carved into bunkers, tunnels, and artillery nests. Most of his remaining men were conscripts from the shattered 14th Army, and they were determined to fight to the death. From March through May 1945, the battle for Balit Pass became one of the bloodiest engagements of the Luzon campaign. The narrow corridor earned the grim nickname the Abbey of Bones, as corpses piled up amid shattered rocks and jungle mud. The Americans deployed bulldozers, 155mm artillery, and rockets, using tactics to lure Japanese troops out of their caves before striking with grenades and flamethrowers. Despite their losses, Yamashita's soldiers held out until August 1945, when Japan finally surrendered. The fierce resistance in the mountains kept many U.S. divisions tied down in Luzon, far longer than expected. But it also gave them invaluable experience in mountain and jungle warfare, lessons that would soon prove crucial in the final and most brutal battles of the Pacific, especially Okinawa. By the summer of 1945, the fighting on Luzon had finally begun to subside. The remaining Japanese forces had retreated deep into the mountains and jungles, breaking into scattered groups that resisted sporadically but hopelessly. American troops and Filipino guerrillas shifted their focus to mopping up operations, hunting down isolated units, and restoring security to newly liberated regions. On September 2, 1945, Japan formally signed the Instrument of Surrender aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, officially ending World War II. Shortly afterward, General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the infamous Tiger of Malaya, surrendered at Kiangan in Ifugao Province, marking the end of nearly 8 months of fierce combat on Luzon. According to Allied reports, the campaign had wiped out more than 205,000 Japanese soldiers and captured over 9,000 prisoners of war. American forces suffered approximately 10,640 killed and 36,550 wounded, while an estimated 120,000 to 140,000 Filipino civilians, most of them in the Manila massacre, lost their lives. The Battle of Luzon was the largest U.S. campaign in the Pacific Theater, involving 10 divisions and 5 independent regiments, an operation unmatched in scale anywhere else in the Southwest Pacific. For General Douglas MacArthur, the victory on Luzon was far more than a strategic triumph. It was the fulfillment of a promise. He had returned, liberated the Philippines, and severed Japan's vital supply lines from Southeast Asia. The recapture of Luzon and Manila carried immense political, military, and emotional significance. It ended 4 years of brutal occupation, paved the way for the restoration of the Philippine government, and provided a massive forward base for the upcoming campaigns at Okinawa and potentially Kyushu, in preparation for an invasion of the Japanese homeland. The battles of San Manuel, Clark Field, Nichols Field, Corregidor, Bataan, Manila, Antipolo, and Ipo tested the full coordination of America's Army, Navy, Air Force, and Special Operations units. They also highlighted the extraordinary courage of Filipino guerrillas, U.S. soldiers, engineers, medical personnel, and civilians who together endured hunger, destruction, and death in the pursuit of freedom.